Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the QRL Show, the place where you come for the crypto and stay for the quantum. On today's episode, my co-host Michael Strike and I from the QRL core team are excited to be joined by Alex Pruden. Alex is the CEO and co-founder of Project 11, chairman of Alio, former A16Z, crypto, Stanford Graduate School of Business alum, U.S. Army Green Beret, to name a few. In a moment, I'll let Alex fill in the holes. Alex, it's good to have you with Michael and I today.
Yeah, welcome.
Hey. Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, guys. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really, I gave kind of a high-level intro there, but as a first question, two-parter, fill in any holes in my intro. Let our audience, some of the people in our audience will already be familiar with either some of your past interviews or Project 11, but for the subset of people that don't, who are you, and what is Project 11, all about, and what do you guys do? I know that there's the enterprise side, developer side, but from a high level, how do you explain what Project 11 does? And the question before that of, who are you?
Yep. So you hit all the highlights, I would say, and maybe like what people are thinking, like that's like kind of a random chain of jobs to have. Explain how those go together. So maybe I'll endeavor to do that. So I joined the Army. I went to West Point right after 9/11 and commissioned in 2008. Spent 9 years in the service, and I got interested in digital assets and specifically Bitcoin, working in the Middle East in 2015. I was working as a Green Beret, and the team that I was on, one of our jobs was to train the Syrian rebel forces that were fighting the Assad regime at the time. And we briefly explored using Bitcoin as a mechanism of compensating those folks. It kind of never went anywhere, but in that brief period of exploration, by the way, compensating these folks, meaning like these, the folks we were training had to go back across the border. We were in Turkey, they were in Syria, they were fighting, and they had needs that they had to buy on the economy. They didn't want to use cash.
Yes.
Cash has a bunch of downsides, obviously. So anyway, in the exploration of using Bitcoin to solve that problem, that's how I got introduced to the whole space. And I was really fascinated by this concept of borderless money. And after I came home from that deployment, I made the decision to leave the military. Like anyone who makes a career transition and doesn't know what to do next, I went to business school. But at business school, I was obviously doing business stuff, but I was really wanting to get into the crypto space, which at the time was very nascent. And so I started the Stanford Blockchain Club, and then was moonlighting in a bunch of classes I had no business being in the computer science school at Stanford, specifically around the topic of cryptography. And fortunately, like one of my professors, I guess to use the right term is took pity on me. And made some introductions that basically put me on the path of the career I'm on now, which is first was to Coinbase. And so I ended up joining Coinbase as an intern. I interned at Coinbase right when they were first starting to scale up, and was planning on going back there to, start in crypto after I graduated. But another introduction that my professor made was to the folks at Andreessen Horowitz, which had a crypto team. So kind of by luck, really, I ended up with the opportunity to meet the A16Z crypto folks, and then they ended up bringing me on to be an investor on the first fund, or an investment partner on the first fund there. So that was really fun and interesting, because a lot of the protocols that are kind of name brands today, Solana, Avalanche,
all came out of that.
All were that era, right? And so a lot of these founders who are obviously very wealthy and famous now, I kind of knew way before that. I also covered Libra, which, speaking of throwbacks to the past, was Facebook's. For some people may remember, it was Facebook's basically cryptocurrency that they were proposing that got shut down effectively by all the government regulators. And that concept, though, is kind of being rebooted in the form of Tempo and a bunch of other stuff. So anyway, it was an interesting time, but I didn't really enjoy being an investor as much as I thought I would enjoy being an operator. And so I left the firm to go join a company called Alio, which was building basically privacy preserving smart contracts. So think of Zcash as privacy preserving Bitcoin. Alio was trying to be privacy preserving Ethereum, basically. And joined. I was the first employee of joined a 4-person technical team, basically. And I ended up becoming the CEO, and we took that protocol from zero to launch over the course of 4 years. By the end of it, I was running the foundation. and yeah, but ultimately decided to step down and pass the reins back to one of the technical founders who was running the labs company, and then a guy that I hired as my COO now runs or was running when I left the foundation, and doing a great job there. So I'm still on the board, but ultimately I stepped back in 2024 and I thought about what I wanted to do next, and just like my experience in the Army kind of inspired me to take the next step and to get into crypto generally, my experience in Alio really inspired me to go down and look at post quantum cryptography for the following reason. I didn't know anything about quantum other than, what I'd learned in basically, in classes where it's like, hey, quantum kills cryptography, at some point, but we don't know when. But, the 2024, the Google paper came out, the Willow paper that described, hey, here's how a quantum computer, here's some progress on the topic of quantum computing. And I started to wonder, how hard would it be for crypto to migrate and to update all of its cryptography to post-quantum cryptography? And I had the experience of having just launched Alio, which was like many layer one, journeys, is 15 delays, a lot of difficulties. It's because you get one chance to launch these protocols, and then subsequently they're securing value and potentially unnumbering the billions of dollars, or in the case of Bitcoin, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I was like, wow, this is something that's going to be massively impactful to blockchains. And even though I think people have different opinions around when quantum is coming, I think it's certainly the case that this is going to be a monumental effort for crypto to transition to PQ, which is what ultimately led me to found Project 11. And sorry to keep going on. You asked me two questions though. What is Project 11?
No, that's perfect. I want to expand on the Project 11 one. You already kind of partly answered. One of my other questions was going to be around, hey, you were at Alio and, obviously a leader in, ZK proofs there. And I was going to ask, hey, what made you redirect your focus to this threat of quantum computing and how to solve it? But I was going to make a mention before that of, there's probably, I could probably name a couple hands how many people have publicly talked about the quantum threat as much as Michael and I have over the last few years, and you certainly fall in that bucket. Over the last year or so, I've had a number of colleagues and friends, reach out through some back channels and say, hey, I saw Alex on, heard him on Unchained or TBPN, and he was talking about exactly what you guys have been saying for a while. So it's like it's nice to say, yeah, it's awesome. Like it's great to see that. And with that, I think when all of us are talking about this intersection, we're addressing an elephant in the room, which is the quantum threat. So there's naturally going to be either some or a ton of hostility depending on who the audience is. And I personally think it takes a certain personality type and naturally thick skin to be okay with knowing, okay, hey, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but the tides are going to change over time, and we're here to kind of play the long game. So kind of my question is, you've seen probably a lot of that. It's maybe a little different on stage, but like we're talking about huge market cap projects where the idea of having to move to post quantum, it kind of goes against a lot of people's beliefs, incentives. We talk about this a lot, me and Michael, about there's a big, human element and messiness there. But my question is like, how have you seen that through your lens? Because I'm sure some of it's, as a former Green Beret, you've seen it all too. A lot of stuff probably doesn't faze you, but like a lot of stuff's coming out about, what people think about this, and people might not dislike any of us, but they might dislike our messaging. So it's a little bit of an open-ended question, but how have you seen it over the last year?
I think what I would say is, I think what you guys have been building and saying, I completely agree with, in the sense of like post quantum cryptography is the future. Like we're not even going to call post quantum cryptography in the future, right? Yep. It's just going to be cryptography. People will like look at what we're doing now as a funny kind of classical footnote. It quite frankly surprises me how much hostility or I guess lack of willingness to engage on this topic has been. I think it's gotten a lot better. As you know, like, so you referenced I was on TBPN. I mean, all of these press interviews most of them that I did came in the aftermath of that Google paper, yep. Which we were, we had been talking to that team for a while. And quite frankly, the quantum physicists and the quantum research space hadn't really looked at crypto. Whenever they're benchmarking Shor's algorithm, it was mostly against RSA, which is a completely different crypto system. And we kind of like and we're cited in the paper as such as like kind of cluing the Google folks in on this fact that, hey, the crypto system that's using blockchains is different. Obviously, too, there's a lot of value at stake here. And that was motivated the paper. Then the paper came out, and then we got, I got to get on a soapbox and talk about a lot of the things that you guys have been talking about, that we've all talked about together around these risks that are real, and why. So, of course, obviously, in the course of that, I've been attacked personally, professionally by a bunch of people for a variety of things. I think maybe the comment I'll make is it surprises me a little bit, particularly in the field of cryptography, how controversial this is. And I know a lot of cryptographers I deeply respect who really think that quantum computing could never happen. And I think it's so fascinating because there is, on the other end of the spectrum, a bunch of quantum physicists, including some of whom are our advisors, like the CEO of Oratomic, the neutral atom quantum computing company, just announced a $1.3 billion round. Like, he's an advisor. Caltech, Harvard, like top end quantum physicists. Those folks are like convinced that we're on the cusp. And so it's just crazy. There's this huge divergence between, like, frankly, the quantum computing research community and the cryptography community that has started to narrow finally. But it's crazy to me how far apart they are. And and I still get a lot of pushback, even beyond, I think you mentioned all the incentives, of course, but I think that's like one that surprised me.
I've given this some thought too. First off, we're at the intersection of multiple complex. I guess Bitcoin's not really nascent, or blockchain's not really nascent, but I would describe it as inherently complex for most people still to understand, since even simple things like self-custody in blockchain are still relatively rare, right? So you have a complex technology like blockchain, you have relatively complex technology like quantum computing, and I think it took, and I still don't even think we're there yet. We don't have the blockchain devs, the quantum physicists, and the cryptographers really all in the same room.
Totally.
Yeah. And each one comes with a unique skill set that's necessary in order to solve this problem. And when I see blockchain developers talking about the likelihood of cryptography relevant quantum computers, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. Thinking to myself, have you seen, how can you talk about a completely different field in the progress of that field and speak authoritarian, in an authoritarian way on something like that? But at the same time, we are human beings. We are subject to our own bias, our own self-interests. I think it's probably in one's life, it's probably one of one's own personal quest to identify what those biases are and what those interests are, and try to stick to a truthful, principled nature if you can. I don't know if we're quite there yet in the wild west that is blockchain. However, I still don't think we have all the right people in the room. And in blockchain by itself is even just project to project, but blockchain by itself is very tribal. For a while, I've been in blockchain. I've been Bitcoin since 2013 or so, when I was mining, and I can remember just in 2017, 2018, it was almost. You could almost refer to it as a religion, almost, kind of. The same type of fanaticism. Which is understandable. When you do work or when you look into the history of money, and and you see how things evolve, and suddenly you have this new tech. Yes, I can. It. And I've always said this. I've always said Bitcoin has always been a socio-economic experiment, and I've gone from not knowing anything about Bitcoin to Bitcoin maximalist to an altcoin acceptance to now I'm kind of at a point to where I have quite a bit of doubt as to the future of Bitcoin myself personally. And that's not just because of the quantum threat, but also because of some consensus disparities and the inability to align in underlying motives that I can kind of feel but can't really show. But little bit off track, a little bit, but still some of what you were saying, kind of my thoughts.
Your characterization of Bitcoin is exactly right. And there's incentives at play for sure. But I think, to me, there's a right answer to this question of quantum, because like you could argue that like us here are biased to thinking quantum is sooner. And, if you're a diehard Bitcoiner or,
Sure.
someone who doesn't want to think about the challenge of
Sure.
migrating, you're incentivized to think of quantum is later. Look, I think though, the reality here is we're talking about a system defined by trust, right? Why do people trust cryptography? Why do people invest in Bitcoin? It's this concept of trust, right? We trust that the cryptography underlying Bitcoin is never going to be broken. We trust that this math underneath
code, so you don't have to trust the network. You don't have to trust the people on the network. It's all based on trust.
Exactly. And
this is start to compromise even some of that trust, that $1.5 trillion of Bitcoin becomes a very large number.
Exactly. So even if we don't have the definite answer of when a quantum computer is coming, we can strengthen that trust in these systems by being proactive and addressing this risk. Because this risk is not like many other risks where it's like, oh, like take one for Bitcoin. Like, is Michael Saylor going to do this or that today? This is an existential risk for this asset class. So
it affects everyone. Yeah.
It affects everyone, and it affects everyone's value, and it could bring the value of the whole thing to zero. So it's sort of like, against an existential risk like that, it's crazy to me to not feel any need whatsoever to plan or prepare. That's my biased opinion, but
those are great points. My take is at this point, and I think I've said this probably about the past 8 months or so, it doesn't matter if you believe in quantum computing or not, whether or not they're unicorns or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Governments have already been working on the standards. They've mandated that their own systems have to be upgraded in a lot of countries 2029, 2030, China, Australia, United States. Corporate will have to follow government standards, and retail and open source, they will also, they'll follow suit as well. So at this point, I don't think it really matters what you personally believe. I think this is what the standards are going to be, and it's going to be much harder to build a case as to why you haven't upgraded to a standard rather than why you did. I mean, one argument's just a lot easier than the other, and at some point in, we've actually said this on past episodes too. Cryptography going back, cryptography itself going back hundreds, thousands, if not thousands of years, started with pen and paper, then it transitioned into mechanical, then it transitioned into integrated circuitry, then it translated into software, and that all eventually became classical cryptography. At some point, post-quantum security is just going to be classical security. So post-quantum will just be assumed, but
exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask a question around, like, Michael, we've talked on that in past episodes in terms of, like, generally the direction of where the puck's going. Don't just listen to what, one person is saying. Directionally look at, like, when, Google comes out with a paper, what the world, leading governments, are doing, the biggest companies, where progress is heading in general. One question I want to ask, Alex, is through your work with Project 11, and you guys are in the room with, a variety of, individuals or groups, collective groups within, some of the big blockchain projects. So you're chatting a lot with different core devs, foundations, teams behind these, some of these big name projects. And over the last 12 to 18 months, as all three of us have clearly seen, the tone has definitely started to shift in like a little bit quicker direction of, this is 10 to 20 years out. There's still groups of people that believe that, but many more people are now getting on board with, whether it's forming an independent quantum advisory committee or publicly saying, hey, for Ethereum, this is our plan for post-quantum, or fill in the blank. One question I think our audience would like to know.
Quantum's not a problem, but we're forming an advisory board. But it's not a problem. Quantum's not a problem, but we're forming an advisory board.
Yeah. So my question is, in some of those conversations, we don't need to name a particular one or name the project by any means, but what are people or, individuals or groups within these projects saying privately that they wouldn't be saying publicly? Because there's a gap there still between, at least from what I've witnessed, of people are changing their sentiment publicly, but still privately they're willing to admit that this is a much bigger problem and they need to act sooner. So what's your take on this? I know everyone's might be a little different, but
I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard to paint with a broad brush because there's a huge, it's a very, very diverse space. But I think, like, to Michael, kind of your point is like, it's not a problem. We need an advisory board. I feel like when we started Project 11 2 years ago or so, the first take was just like, quantum isn't real. Like, it just doesn't exist. We just reject the notion that quantum computing can even exist, right? And people like, honestly, like, you would get laughed. I feel like I've been laughed at like,
we have been at conferences too. Yeah.
It's like, people laughed at you, right? It's like funny to say that now, but I mean, it's literally like, because I feel like, we've passed that obviously, but it's like people literally laugh in the face, right? As you guys know. And now it's like, people have accepted this, the Schelling point, so to speak, has moved. People have like accepted that quantum is real. But to your point, like, they're like, oh, well, it's no big deal if quantum is real. We can just solve it. No problem, right? And I think like that's sort of the next main barrier of ignorance, where I don't think, and this has nothing to really do with quantum as much as it has to do with just security engineering and cryptography, of just like the way the systems have been built up to this point, especially in blockchain, really depend on the classical and specifically elliptic curve cryptography that we've been using. Let me just take an example from my own past job at Aleo. Aleo uses a zero knowledge proof system that depends on the discrete log assumption for soundness. So in other words, the proof system underlying Aleo breaks in a post-quantum world. Now, you can make all kinds of arguments as to whether or not like Aleo is really vulnerable or not, and like, would it be targeted or not? But the reality is, like, the underlying cryptographic guarantee that you use when you use Aleo is fundamentally broken. And this is true universally across the space. So basically every chain, obviously there are exceptions like QRL, where this is built with that in mind. And so therefore from the ground up, you're building with post-quantum security. But for anyone who's deployed using classical assumptions, then they're broken effectively. And they're broken. It's like broken in the worst way. And that like the trust in the system is what is at stake. And so I think different teams have gotten to different points of accepting that. I think once teams have accepted it, then I think there's different teams are at different points of accepting what it will take to fix. And I think this is one thing that I think a lot of folks don't appreciate about the transition for blockchain specifically, is the coming to consensus, not only within a community around a protocol, but also within like the ecosystem of infrastructure providers and applications on top of the protocol. Because this is these decentralized architectures are a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing in the sense that they enable us to have this trustless system that you can't replicate any other way. They're a curse in the sense when you have to do a cryptographic migration like this, it's nightmarish because there are a million dependencies all over the place. Let me make a very tangible example. Custody. The way custody works in many cases today for many networks uses something called threshold cryptography, basically a fancy version of a multisig. The way that is done is entirely dependent on elliptic curve cryptography. So if you move away from elliptic curve cryptography, this concept of being able to threshold or shard or share the key with multiple parties and then still combine for one signature goes away. And that is the basis for the entire digital asset custody industry as it exists today, more or less. And so like, this is the thing, like people don't even realize like the downstream effects of what this migration will take. Beyond, right. and even beyond that, there's like a question of which algorithm to go with, because as you guys know, having engineered in the space, blockchains are very unique. It's a very unique setting compared to a lot of other systems, right? This decentralized architecture means there are very specific performance requirements and very specific size requirements that you can't just put any old scheme in and expect it to work. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you guys are running on XMSS currently, like XMSS or like as a signature scheme. You guys
currently.
Tell me if that's wrong.
Currently.
But like one nice thing about XMSS is it's smaller, right? And I'm sure like you could probably get away with, or you could probably consider going with a larger stateless scheme, but that has major trade-offs in a decentralized architecture, right? Maybe they're worth it, maybe they're not. But the point being is like, this is not going to be a flip of a switch situation. This is like, I think some people like, again, when they're kind of at this stage of like the second stage of grief, they're kind of like, oh, this is Y2K. Y2K was a flip of a switch. That is
yeah. You're speaking to you're preaching the choir here. So now keep going.
Yeah. So you guys know. I mean, we're all in the same boat here.
The Y2K thing. So that I've talked. It's really interesting to hear someone echo some of my own sentiments, because it doesn't usually work out that way. Y2K, we knew exactly what was going to happen, right? We had a deadline. We knew that was the first specific date and time. When CR cryptographic relevant quantum computers hit, honestly, I don't even think you'll know. There's no the people that have the ones with the most powerful machines, they have no incentive whatsoever to let you know that they exist. Third off, those are, the fix in that is centralized IT departments, right, that are forced to work together. The solution with blockchain is decentralized, right? The entire world has to work to get together without forking. So many differences. Yeah, it's not Y2K. Yeah, that's I agree with that sentence. I had a question for you. You said one of the things as you've seen the evolution of post-quantum cryptography in blockchain, the first thing I heard you say is, finally. It's okay. Yes, it's a problem. We'll accept that this is moving forward and that something needs to be done about it. Then I heard you say, okay, now what will it take to fix it? One thing that I wonder about is the next stage of realization, or the next level of epiphany that happens, is I don't think blockchain realizes yet that when they put, okay, we have a solution, we've got a roadmap, we're upgrading to this post-quantum secure DSA, and this is our roadmap, and we'll have this done in 4 to 5 years or whatever. Okay. Nobody ever talks about what the costs, in my opinion, let me know what your opinion is, please. Nobody ever talks about what the costs are associated with a post-quantum migration upgrade. For example, property confiscation. What do you do when you eventually have to disable legacy DSAs, if you actually disable them, or if you leave them to survival of the fittest with CRQCs, right? And what that does to the underlying philosophy. Now, what you did is you brought up trust early on in the conversation, which I like, because that's the fundamental philosophy or ethos under which blockchain was developed. It's all based on trust. You trust the code to do what it's supposed to do. You trust the cryptography to do what it's supposed to do, so you don't have to trust anybody else on the network. Quantum computing erodes that foundation of trust, in that just moving forward and making a chain post-quantum secure in most cases forces you into a position for asset freezing or no asset freezing, which brings questions to property ownership. Like even let's say I'm moving to a new L1 chain, there's fungibility issues. Okay, I've got XYZ token here on an ERC20. I've got XYZ token here on a quantum secure L1. They're the same ticker, but they're supposed to be the same value. And I think that it's misunderstood and not fully realized that upgrading to a post-quantum secure chain, a classical chain to a post-quantum secure chain, has the ability and the potential to completely rewrite what blockchain means by eroding its philosophy, by attacking its trust model. This is the theory that I talk about. I don't hear many other people talk about this on crypto Twitter, X, or wherever else, but what's your take? Curious.
I think it's great. So yeah, I think the way I would frame it is, or I guess just to start at my framing is, so we've accepted quantum is real now, I think, as an industry. And now it's like people have accepted there needs to be something to be done. And I think the current thing that people are hung up on is they think it's going to be easy. I think a lot of protocols, and by the way, there are, I want to be clear, there are numerous protocols and numerous people in the space that are taking this seriously and working on solutions. And so it's not broad brush here. But I think on average, I think everyone's like, this is Y2K, we can just flip a switch. And I think this is going to be the third realization, is exactly what you said, is the migration piece opens up a bunch of can of worms. Let me pick an example from a protocol that I actually think is doing quite well with posturing towards protecting, to being post-quantum secure, but where this issue is very front and center, and that's Zcash. So Zcash is a privacy-preserving, like I mentioned it earlier, it's basically privacy-preserving Bitcoin using zero-knowledge proofs. Zcash just yesterday shipped basically a new shielded pool, which is like a mechanism by which you can get privacy on the network, that has a post-quantum recoverability mechanism, which is really novel and interesting and cool. And it basically helps address it's a potential solution to seamlessly address migration away from what is currently a quantum vulnerable system to a post-quantum secure system. So I think they deserve to be applauded for that. I think it's fantastic. Interestingly, though, like if you look at Zcash, Zcash shows you exactly what the challenge will be. Zcash actually has not just one shielded pool. There are multiple shielded pools because, as you point out, Michael, like you don't like turn off these systems. Like they kind of continue and persist. And so you can actually go to the Zcash block explorer and see there's like Orchard, which is the current pool that is meant to be deprecated in favor of Ironwood, the new shielded pool, still has a bunch of funds in it. By the way, the pool before Orchard, Sapling, still has about like 20% of all the shielded funds, I think is the number. I can't remember off the top of my head. But some significant portion of all shielded Zcash is in 2 versions of shielded pool ago, right? So this is exactly to your point. Like you can't, first off, the Zcash developers and the community that is putting these protocol upgrades can't force anyone to migrate, or they can't force migrate anyone. Like that's just
there's a manual aspect. We talk about this at length and continue with this, but it's one thing even to talk about it in theory, and then it's so much hairier when it's in the wild and in motion. So no, keep going on that.
You can see it. I mean, and you can just go. Anyone can go on yourself and look at a Zcash block explorer and look at the shielded pools, and you just every single time there's an upgrade, there is this exact requirement for people to move from one to the other, and every single time, without fail, there is leftovers of people who either lost their keys, don't care, didn't get the memo, but they're there now. And theoretically, like that, imagine this is a quantum scenario. This is now, to your point, Michael, is like, what happens to those people? Because now you're faced with a choice. Bitcoin is where this comes up all the time because it's most acute, because Satoshi's gone maybe or whatever. And we assume 15% of Bitcoin is lost. But what do? You're kind of faced with this dilemma where it's like, well, on the one hand, we can confiscate the tokens of this, and maybe it's not confiscating if you assume they're all lost. You're effectively confiscating,
reappropriating,
no freeze, all sorts
freezing them,
lots of fun words can be used.
Or you're letting the quantum computer steal them. So Satoshi is losing their coins either way, right? Like that's not a debate even, really. It's just a question of who's going to steal them.
And then you'll have a run on the bank, order of magnitude, blow, and who knows it'll be happening before many people even know about it. That's another debate altogether, but.
Exactly. So I think this is just like this is the thing that I think, and this is like thankfully a lot of the protocols have come around to thinking they need to address this. But unfortunately, a lot of times the people that are working on these solutions are researchers who are just thinking about it in an academic way and not considering the downstream impacts of what this actually means for a deployed system that is meant to be monetary. And therefore has the properties that you described earlier, Michael, where it's like, this is a socioeconomic thing. It's not really a mathematical thing. Mathematics is a key part of the trust model, but it's not solely a mathematical problem.
So to distill it down, I'm going to oversimplify it, but essentially it comes down to the Bitcoin and blockchain philosophy was founded on what's mine is mine, right? I have ownership of something, and no matter
not your keys, not your crypto.
Not your keys, not your crypto, and I've thrown in not your node, not your rules in the past. But yeah, exactly. Not your keys, not your crypto. And you're right. Quantum computing has the potential to break not your keys, not your crypto. Right? Because you could still have the private keys, and suddenly you don't have the crypto anymore too. And these are founding principles, founding ethos, the philosophy of itself. I honestly believe we're going to see a crumbling of the foundational philosophy that Bitcoin and blockchain was founded on, that made it so revolutionary. I think we're going to see that under attack, not just from quantum, but also in other areas, but definitely with quantum. It's going to be an interesting next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and look, let's pull in someone else who's not Bitcoin. I think it's easy to pick on Bitcoin because there's no one to pick on. It's so decentralized, which is one of the beautiful parts about Bitcoin, to be clear. But let's pick on someone who actually should theoretically.
It also makes it hard to agree on anything. But go ahead.
Well, yes, there's that. But let's pick on a stablecoin issuer. Let's just pick out one, for example. Let's pick Circle, right? So USDC. Let's say Circle. Circle's a centralized company. The smart contract infrastructure is perfectly centralized. You can upgrade. Circle, with little effort, probably could upgrade its smart contracts to be post-quantum secure. However, the USDC that is issued is under keys that Circle doesn't control.
Right.
So how do you upgrade? Again, just like Bitcoin can't upgrade Satoshi, Circle cannot upgrade my USDC. And this is, I think, the
intertwinedness of it. Yeah.
People fundamentally do not get this, right? And therefore, like, what does, and the philosophical piece that you're getting at, I think what it really attacked, like the philosophical question at issue is, what does ownership mean? In a world with a quantum computer and classical cryptographic assumptions, ownership on blockchains ceases to have meaning, right? Because the quantum computer in some sense owns everyone's crypto that's classically secured, right? But obviously it's like, so therefore imagine a payment system that's built using and integrating USDC. How the hell are they supposed to distinguish between legitimate owner of the USDC and the quantum attacker? There's literally no way to. So this is like, and again, this is not like, this is again, like, there are people that think this is easy. This is why it is not easy, is because this is a decentralized system. It is its strength. That is a powerful thing. It enables us to have these systems that are totally novel and are capable of things that have never been possible before. But this is the downside.
To summarize, I'll summarize a lot of what Alex and I were just talking about. Alex, I think it was last week, Ryan and I and Joseph went through a list of 7 or 8 agnostic migration schemes that included hybrid chains, forking on new post-quantum signatures, time delayed mechanisms, all of the large known classical migration schemes, and they all essentially have one thing in common, in that something that Ryan alluded to is the user has to do something without, because there is no system-wide function that's built into Bitcoin or other chains. In other words, you have to provoke the user to go to the terminal and do something online, and for whatever reason, history has shown us that this will not happen, right? And I think people that have strong vested interests in Bitcoin know this. You might have seen CZ float the idea about 4 weeks ago of confiscating Satoshi's coins. That's perhaps maybe why it came up. I don't know. I can't speak for the rest of you, but my own personal thought on this is, if you can reach consensus and confiscate the proprietor or the inventor of Bitcoin and make it a consensus that it's okay to confiscate his coins, I think that opens a door, and sets a precedent that the onesie twosie retail with only like 10 or 20 Bitcoin, or the small guys compared to Satoshi. I think it sets a precedent that, hey, we've already done this with Satoshi. You think you're more important than Satoshi? We confiscated his. We have to secure the protocol in the interests of the protocol and make sure that Bitcoin survives this. This is for you, and I think that opens the door for the ability to start to rewrite the narrative as to what blockchain means. These are my own personal thoughts.
I mean, one of the reasons I love blockchain so much. So my undergrad was in political science, and I went to West Point, so I took some technical engineering courses. But my major and my focus was political science. I mean, blockchains, I think, are really, when you boil them down, are political systems as much as anything else. And these questions of majority rules versus minority rights, rule of the masses versus rule of elites, come up implicitly, literally all the time. But there is, I think, one distinct difference, though, between, I think going back to something you said that's very important for people to understand. I think there is a bright line. So first off, maybe the spectrum I just described, where it's like majority rights, minority rules, different ecosystems and different communities will decide for themselves where on the spectrum they fall. I mean, you could, Bitcoiners love to throw shade at Ethereum, for example, right? Because they're like, oh, it's so centralized because there's a foundation that's theoretically moved it, and the DAO hack just proved it all, And then, you look at Ethereum and they point at Solana and they're like, look how centralized it is. These guys are all running in data centers. To some extent, there is like, it's a bit of a degree on like, where do you fall on the spectrum? However, though, I think the one important thing you said is like, there is one very bright line here where if one person can press a button and make everyone post-quantum secure, then it's definitely not decentralized at all, right? So that is definitively not a blockchain. So I think like,
at least how we define it today.
Yeah. So like, I think that is like the key thing that all of these systems share is this: the ownership, which is cryptographically conferred to the end user. That is a very different, even if the consensus rules are, like 5 people make blocks, whatever, like the ownership of the asset is cryptographically guaranteed to be sitting with the end user. That is uniquely, in my opinion, what makes blockchains special. And it is what makes this different from like Google's migration, right? Google's going to upgrade all their stuff by 2029. They don't have the same challenge in many ways. They have a challenge to be sure, but it's definitely not the same challenge.
They're all working on the same team with the same goals set by management, and much more likely to reach consensus.
I have one that I want to get it.
Less variable, less different pillars of interest. But yes.
Yeah, no, I feel like
are we on track here, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I'll get us back. We could talk on that for a while, but for sake, I'll jump to the next question here. I know, Alex, you gave the circle example. Obviously, we talked in Bitcoin for a little bit. We could run through a list of fill in the blank project and, talk about some of the, cons or the pros of potentially their approaches or what they could or couldn't do depending on the constraints. But one part I want to talk on a little bit is obviously with us, QRL being post-quantum native, in your work with Project 11, you're trying to, move projects, the space towards a world of being post-quantum and ready for that. One part I'd want to ask from you is, what part do you think that is still something that people are underestimating specific to the time of taking action? So what I mean by that is the classic, counter to the quantum threat is, it's a while back. I can wait another year or two. And I know we talked about flipping a switch, but when it comes to actually, migrating everything over and, doing that, walking on a tightrope, what would you say to any project out there, any blockchain project, whether it's one of the largest or anywhere down the ladder, on the time urgency of it? Obviously, we can point at different dates of what publicly has been said, but when we're specifically looking at blockchain projects, 5 years, 3 years, like, are a lot of projects late right now? What's your take on this part?
Yeah, so the framework that I like to apply here is something called Mosca's Inequality. Michel Mosca is a researcher at University of Waterloo, and he does a lot of work on quantum cryptanalysis and he's done some work on post-quantum cryptography. I think he has a company as well. Very smart gentleman. He has a whole framework called Mosca's Inequality. And basically, it's pretty simple. I mean, even though he's a very smart guy, this is a pretty simple framework that anyone can apply. It's like, how long until a quantum computer shows up? And that's like one time bar. And then how long is it going to take you to be ready? That's the other time bar, right? And so basically, you like drop down how long it's going to take you to be ready. And by the way, we spent most of this conversation arguing, I think, for everyone in the audience, just to catch everyone up or to summarize, we've been arguing that most people are underestimating that time bar that it's going to take to get ready. And then there's a question of like, what is the time bar for how far away is the quantum computer? So in the interest of changing it up and just focusing on the second one for a second, where are we at with regard to quantum? And I'll maybe speak here and just kind of give a couple reasons why I think the Q-Day threat is closer than people think. So we have a report that we released that estimates Q-Day better chances than not will occur by 2032. So a 51% chance we have a quantum computer by 2032, with as much of a 10% chance by the end of the decade, we will already have one. So the end of this decade, 2030, right? So that's within 4.5 years. Okay, where do those numbers come from? Those numbers come from 3 sources. One, every year there's a global risk survey that I actually think Michel Mosca runs, that basically polls all the cryptographers and quantum researchers and said, hey, how far away do you think this is, right? So it's basically like a survey of the experts. In the last year, that has people's consensus has pulled forward massively. There's been a complete change from like maybe 15 to 20 years away to almost certainly within 10, has kind of been how that's evolved among experts. The second data point we pull in is quantum computing roadmaps themselves.
Right.
Quantum, you look at IonQ, you look at IBM, you look at Google, who has their own quantum effort. You look at Oratomic, who I referenced earlier, and like the public comments they made. I mean, like generally speaking, these companies see them. They don't usually talk publicly about cryptographic applications, but reading between the lines of the capabilities that they say they're going to have, you can assume cryptographic relevance by the end of the decade is all of their plans.
So let's say 5 years.
Within 5 years.
Yeah, let's say within 5 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then I think you can also just do some napkin math and be like, okay, what are all the bottlenecks? Where does everyone stay? Where are people at currently in terms of like how many logical qubits? How long lived is an individual logical qubit? What are the requirements of Shor's algorithm? What do you need to put all this together? Where are we at on lasers? Blah, 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 blah. And you can just basically like kind of napkin math some fixed percent of improvement per year on those things. Of course, this is like a gross estimate, not super hyper fine, but you can basically arrive at the numbers I said, 2030 to 2032, I think for me is like the time limit. So, okay. So now like, what are people underestimating? Well, look, I think I would argue that because for all the reasons we've talked about up to this point in the show, like we should have already started this like a year ago. I'm very happy to see that finally this issue is getting its due, but I still think the thing that people are underestimating is that talk and action are two different things. And like you guys have built a protocol and you've delivered and you've shipped it into the world. I helped build Aleo, and me and the team there shipped it into the world. And we can, in this conversation, all collectively say with authority that it's much easier to write a paper about an idea than it is to actually engineer and ship it. And I think like, unfortunately, there's still way too much of like, we're going to fool around with ideas and do some research, wonky research directions. And I would rather see more people spend resources just going towards like the solutions we have at hand now, because I think quite frankly, if we just take what we have now, it's going to be everything. It's going to take us all of our effort just to get there in time.
So in your scenario of Mosca's theorem, I shot out 5 years just as an example.
Yeah.
That would have to include from the talking points you talk about to the design to implementation,
testing,
to
auditing,
to adding DSAs. Testing, sandboxing out too, of course, retrofitting on a DSA or whatever, having all of the users migrate their keys over.
A secure migration tool.
Even? I may be skipping over some steps.
I'm interrupting you to make the point that you're going to make. I'll let you finish.
Yes, no, yeah. The point being that there are so many steps, and in Mosca's theorem, it brings you all the way to we have a post quantum secure chain, but that's not what you read on Twitter. What you read on Twitter is we're post quantum ready. In that you can now do a post quantum secure transaction. And
exactly.
And I think. And I wonder when I read that, do they know what I think blockchain has revealed some interesting things about human nature. Some have surprised me, some have not. But there are times I do wonder, do they believe what they're saying? And I've said this before, a post-quantum secure transaction does not a post-quantum secure blockchain make. I don't know why I like to say it that way. I just do. But in your scenario, this brings us all the way to the finality of what let's call it BIP 360 and BIP 361 combined until if we're talking Bitcoin, to its conclusion that all the DSAs are legacy. All the legacy code is disabled. Now we are post-quantum secure. We have picked the winners, and we have picked the winners, and we have picked the losers. Some people have lost coins. They're whatever, or they for whatever the coins have been invalidated or reappropriated. Whatever wordplay gets to be used. And if you apply Mosca's, I've always referred to it Mosca's theorem on the show. If you apply that, then we're already
too late.
5 years behind.
Yeah. And this is like Project 11. The name comes from this. We actually people are like, why do you name Project 11? I'm like, well, if you think about it in Mosca's theorem or inequality terms, it's already the 11th hour right now. And this is not what people usually think about, okay. But I think it's true. And Bitcoin, let's just make this tangible. And I know we're picking on Bitcoin a lot. I think there's a lot of great work happening in Bitcoin. But just to let's just tally the scoreboard. BIP 360, which you referenced a year ago, got a BIP number about a year ago, and in that time,
we've had Hunter on here. We've talked about it. Hunter, he's a great guy.
He's a great guy. Does great work. I really applaud what he's done for to get that. But in the context of Bitcoin, that proposal has moved not at all, right? So in a year, BIP 360 is still at the same point it was a year ago.
Yeah, I think they made some transaction type differences, but essentially, yeah, as far as adoption. But and then you wonder, is like, well, why is it? And in a lot of ways, you're trying to find impossible solutions to fix an impossible problem. There is no clean way in my mind to we're picking on Bitcoin, so let's just continue to pick up Bitcoin. There is no clean way to migrate Bitcoin to like post-quantum security that I've been able to find after years of research, trying to find a way. And I have nothing but respect for Bitcoin developers. They've come up with ideas that I never would have thought of. The time delayed transaction never even crossed my mind. Maybe it should have. I don't know. Just time delayed transactions I never even thought of. Still doesn't solve the problem. And Bitcoin developers are very, very, very creative people. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to kill off something important.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to rewrite what blockchain means, what Bitcoin means. And I think you'll have, I'm going to extrapolate just a little bit. Completely, please feel free to disagree. But I see forks in the future. I see idealists.
Inevitably.
I see the idealists forming a camp. I see private corporate interests forming a camp. I see probably two or three, maybe four.
It's going to be like block wars, but elevated and more prongs off it.
And when you take into consideration of how Bitcoin is integrated into TradFi, okay, so now you can buy Bitcoin as an ETF. Okay, those are in quotes, right? So what does that do to the price of Bitcoin when essentially we've done what human nature has always done in the past? We papered the hell out of gold, and now we've papered the hell out of Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin went ETF, the Bitcoin community rejoiced. We're finally going to get the adoption and the recognition we deserve. And I was probably one of the only people that was hanging my head in shame. However, that's ancient history. I don't know what TradFi is going to do when Bitcoin forks off into A, B, C, and D. That's why I say there will be forks. I will expect chaos.
Yeah.
Those are like Ryan, when do I say that? Like every episode, there will be forks, expect chaos.
Yeah,
that's years and years of distillation.
There's going to be, take it away, Alex. I'll wrap it up after that then.
I was going to say, maybe, and this is like in the spirit of wrapping it up, like I think I'm going to say an optimistic thing and a pessimistic thing. Maybe I'll start with the pessimistic and the optimistic. There are chains and ecosystems, even like quite large ones, that are just simply not going to survive in the post-quantum world.
Yeah,
they will collapse under the weight of these philosophical contradictions, under the challenge of actually doing this migration. The value will fall to zero. And this is possibly even the majority of existing chains and value that's out there. However, there is no reason. And you guys are a good example of like how, like the kind of the positive part of the story is like people have been building to solve this problem for a while. People are building, including among like existing chains too. But like there are people out there that are building this. There are solutions to this problem. And big blockchains, though, to your point, based on trust and it's messy, there is a lot of resilience that is built in here as a result of that. But I think the question is, how much chaos do we as a community want to endure before we get to the other side? That choice is up to us. We can determine that outcome right now by being prepared, by adopting post-quantum cryptography, by doing all those things.
We're still fighting over BIP 110.
And that is a little discouraging. But the point is, it is the choice. We have a choice to fight over BIP 110 or focus on what matters. And now, and this is a choice that every community will make, blockchains and digital assets will survive the post-quantum transition. but it's a question of which ones and what communities will do in response.
What about which people want Bitcoin to survive, or which
Well, yeah, I mean,
want
I feel like that we'll turn that one into we have Alex back on
easier for the next episode.
We frame this entire conversation around everyone essentially being a blockchain advocate. But that's maybe for another episode.
Yeah, no, Alex is another, just to end on another optimistic part. We obviously have seen in recent years, especially in the last heightened awareness in the last 12 to 18, obviously, in the last year, Google paper came out, Project 11 mentioned in there, QRL number of mentions within there. So you have papers like that coming out. You have new progress being made by the largest quantum computing companies in terms of like the number of, error-corrected qubits that you'd have to even be at for Shor's algorithm to be able to run. So it's like, as that gets brought down, as progress gets made, I feel like it's going to be a fun and, scary a little bit too, the next couple years to see, how stuff keeps evolving. But I do think that there is a lot of reason to be optimistic, but I think that people just can't have their blinders on. And from a project level, obviously, waiting and doing nothing is definitely not an option. In terms of for Project 11, we have our very wide-ranging niche audience from all the way from forward-facing retail to academics, researchers, those within institutions that are leaning forward-facing and being like, hey, I either want to do something about what's to come next, or they've already done something. Where's a good place or two for them to learn more about Project 11 and the work, whether that has to do with from an institutional level, like connecting, or contributing if they're a developer? Where's a good couple places for you to point them between now and maybe the next conversation where we keep building on some of our debate and conversation around this?
Yeah, sure. So I'd encourage everyone, if they're interested in learning more on this topic, we spent a really long time working on compiling a report on quantum computing and blockchains and the impacts of the former on the latter. That's at report.project11.com. And then project11.com is our website. We have a bunch of content on there that goes into detail, very specific detail about various aspects of this problem, all the way from like wallets and how they're architected down into like protocol and various schemes that have been proposed for Bitcoin migration, for example. So there's a whole bunch of resources there. And I would say generally for us, I mean, just maybe as a kind of for people to understand what we do, I mean, there's again, as I've just said multiple times on the show, there's multiple layers to this cake here, right? There's protocols, like what you guys are building. Protocols is where ultimately the cryptography lives. It's where the assets are issued on top. But there's all, of course, like for anyone to use the assets on top of these protocols, there needs to be infrastructure, right? And that infrastructure is what we primarily focus on building, primarily focused on institutions. So institutional holders of digital assets who want to start getting ready and getting their infrastructure ready for the post-quantum world. That's really what we're building for, right? So we have a release of a new product in that vein coming up in the next month. We'll share more details soon. But yeah, in the meantime, Project 11 is the place to go. You can sign up for our newsletter there. And then I recommend everyone checking out the report if you're interested in going deeper on this. And we have a very extensive bibliography in that report, I think 100 sources there. And so there's any number of places you can kind of go from there to learn more.
Perfect. Yeah. And for those viewing, we'll have it in the show notes as well, but project11.com, obviously on the website, you can get to all the, social handles, places to keep up to date, as Alex just alluded to, the newsletter for keeping abreast on what is to come. But Michael, and I really appreciate, Alex, you coming on to join us. I feel like a lot of these conversations happen behind closed doors in terms of, the reality of what is to come with the quantum threat, but and be able to publicly talk about it with someone that is batting just as much, if not more than us on, tours and publicly talking at it. It's fun to be able to talk. So we really appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure our audience will as well.
Yeah.
Well, it takes a village, and I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the work that you guys do. And again, I really enjoy the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, until next episode, keep those digital assets post-quantum secure, and we'll see you then.